that it would be nice to bring up the cordyceps fungus mushroom. All right, have you guys heard about this?
I've not
So
heard about this.
what this is we've talked about parasites already, but we haven't talked about this, I don't think. And what this is it's a fungus that somehow or another finds its way into insects, and it slowly develops over time. And it's basically, it's like a spear that like works its way through the insides of the insect, just like slowly taking it out. And you can see in these pictures right here, like top right, how it's just like a bunch of spears just growing out, just like puncturing the insides. Like bottom right, same deal. And my thought was, what if this was a thing for humans all of a sudden in the future? Like we see like a outbreak of the cordyceps disease where like you don't know if like your mom or your sister has the cordyceps, but then you like notice like there's something poking out like down here, and it just starts to grow and it's like contagious and you're like,
yeah, but
I can't be near my mom anymore.
Like it's like a mushroom. Couldn't you just like pull it out of yourself?
Maybe, but I think maybe it's like the deal with the sword where if you pull it out, that's the thing that kills you, right?
I feel like there would have to be I don't know, like a way that a surgery could take it out or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, luckily, like, humans are so advanced that we have technology that would be able to, medical technology that would deal with that. And the other thing about this is, I think this is the same thing that I saw earlier. So this fungus, the reason it takes over insects like this is because the insects can move, and it takes over their brain and tells them to move to this specific spot where it's best for the fungus to grow. Like it has ideal lighting, ideal humidity, ideal temperature, whatever. And it just really wouldn't be able to do that with humans, because our brains are just so much more advanced than an insect.
Are you so sure about that though?
Yeah, I feel like you can't necessarily.
You can't necessarily know, but that is true. It says cordyceps fungus turns insects into zombies. Yeah. So it's the same kind of deal we were talking about with the other parasite from other episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's bizarre.
Any thoughts? Or should we move on?
I'm fine moving on.
Alright, now I want to bring up something else. This is Van Gogh's Magic.
Oh my god, that's sick.
What do you call it? Exhibit in Paris. So you just walk around and you basically get fully immersed in the art.
That's so sick.
Like, this is definitely on my bucket list. Like,
so is that all screens? Or is that projectors?
Like, look at that, dude. It literally looks like you're in the painting.
That's insane.
It's like moving around. It's like 3D kind of. But in any case, I saw that on my Twitter feed. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like that, like that'd be cool to go to.
Yeah.
But then I was like thinking about it more, and I was like when you look at a painting, you feel some sort of way, right? Like you look at that, and you're just instantly, it's like you're transported into the artist's mind. The artist was like trying to get you to feel a certain thing, and he used art as a medium for you to feel it, right? So like you'll look at Starry Night, and there are no words to describe how that makes us feel, but like it's a certain feeling, right? And like I'm willing to bet that the feeling that Joe has and you have is pretty similar to the feeling that I get when I look at that, right? And I was just thinking, like, what is that? Like, why do we resonate with art so much, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems like we were talking about the hero's journey, or like certain like Bible phrases, or just the way that things are worded, or like poetry. Like there's something about like art, the humanities, that just resonates with us. And we talk a lot about like evolution and how evolutionary biology like shapes like why we feel certain ways and why we behave in the way that we feel. And I was just like, there doesn't appear to be any evolutionary purpose for us to like look at art and just like there's something like spiritual about it too, where it's like, whoa, like that's heavy. I just don't know what that is. I was wondering if you guys knew.
One thing.
If you had any thoughts.
Well, so basically the question is like, why are certain things beautiful to us? Like why is there emotion evoked when we see something, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people, the common saying these days is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I don't think that's entirely true, because beauty can have a more subjective definition than just what you think is beautiful. The common one that people say is that something that is beautiful fully reveals what it is intended to show. So, like, for example, a Chinese teapot, right? It's beautiful because it has this art around it that, like, is flowery and all these different things, and it fully reveals the purpose of the teapot. And, well, part of the beauty is the shape of it, right? Like the pottery.
Right.
And part of it is the decoration on it. And all of that fully reveals that it is its true purpose, which is, I guess, like, to produce tea for the warmth and liveliness of people.
So you're
You see what
saying
I'm
part
saying?
of art is like the function of the object?
I don't know if
I agree with that
Okay,
either.
well,
Because we're talking about paintings, though.
Okay, so think about it with a painting. The most beautiful paintings reveal in a deep way something, right? So, like, Starry Night, even though it's not an accurate depiction of the night sky, it reveals, for one, the night sky, and also, I guess, how Van Gogh viewed the night sky and how we can also see it in this way that's, like, unique, but
Yeah.
it still reveals
Okay, I see what you're saying.
the night.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Go ahead, man.
well, I
Sorry.
would say I don't necessarily know if I agree with the idea that you said that, like, beauty, like, I guess beauty is somewhat objective, but there's always going to be like up to a point where, like, certain people are going to find more enjoyment or, like, whatever that feeling is out of certain things, like, or certain genres of art more than others. And kind of going back to what you said, how you were talking about, like, what's, like, the evolutionary advantage. Well, I would almost say, like seeing beauty in other humans, that's, like, the science of, like, attraction. I feel like there's a benefit there. Like, the people you find, like, to be beautiful would be like is someone you see as, like, a more fit mate.
Yeah.
So I feel like that could be, like, a more objective standard.
That's true.
One
beauty.
thing that's really interesting that I heard recently is that there are some animals that overselect evolutionarily overselect for beauty. So, like, yeah, there's a certain degree to which beauty is, like, evolutionarily decided that that person or that mate is the most fit. But at the same time, like, there are bird species and other animals that have over-selected for beauty, where that's become, like, beauty has become more important, and because they're selecting for beauty, they're disregarding these other things that are actually making them more fit. So there's something, like, even deeper than just evolution,
Yeah.
I think, behind
Yeah,
it.
is that kind of talking about, like, the birds that are, like, whichever, like, bird can, like, dance about?
Yeah,
that
or
are,
like
mating
a
certain.
peacock with the biggest feathers.
Yeah.
Like, is that just gonna...
That doesn't
is
necessarily
actually,
help you reproduce.
Yeah,
but
and
it's, like,
actually
what
it might make you less fit, because then predators are gonna see you from
Yeah.
further away, and they're gonna come and attack you.
I think that's a flaw of humans too, because we have the halo effect, like in psych, that we're learning
Oh,
right now,
yeah.
where it's like we think that, like, celebrities, like, we glorify them in society because they're beautiful people, or most of the time they're beautiful people, and, like, attractiveness, like, they've shown that, like, attractive people are more likely to land the job, attractive
Yeah.
people more likely to be seen as smarter, as
Yeah.
like all these sorts of positive traits. So I think we as humans do that too. I want to go back to painting though. Like, you were talking about something where it's like part of the function of art is to transport, like, your perspective to another person. So I think maybe one theory is that, we as humans, we're fascinated by the other perspectives of other humans. And that serves as an evolutionary advantage, because if I'm able to know what you're thinking and Joe's thinking, then as a tribe, we're going to be able to function better because we vibe on the same level. We know how we work and all that sort of stuff. But I think art is just one way for us to kind of, like, transmit those ideas that you can't necessarily put into words, right? There's, like, our language is definitely limited in the aspects of subjective experience that we're able to convey. So we talked about beauty, like the Starry Night. There's something of beauty that Van Gogh is trying to portray to his viewers. But that goes in the inverse too. Francisco Goya, he was this painter, okay? He was very popular in the, I think it was early 1800s. And he starts off, I'm not going to pull it up here, but he starts off his painting is like kind of the same thing as Van Gogh's Starry Night, right? It's like depicting like nature scenes in a way that it's like, hey, like look at this beauty, like look at the world around us, like this sense of awe. And what happens is, I forget what happens in his life, but there are a series of events that cause him to fall off the deep end, basically, and he starts like becoming a hermit, just like walling up in his house and just becoming like borderline psychotic. And you can see it in his paintings, right? Like you look at this. This is a painting is called Satan Devouring His Children, I think. And you just look at that painting and you can see like the borderline like mania, like the horror, like the
It's like,
the
how do you
abyss
think of
that this guy is slipping into. Like he's slowly, like brink by brink, just like, I think he ended up killing himself. But you can see that in that painting. It's just like the way that Goya is viewing reality right now, and his experience is like, I'm able to get a feel of that from looking at that. And then like here's another one, just like,
Ooh.
like just the way that he views the world is transmitted through that.
Yeah, like an unjust God is what he is feeling, and he reveals that through this painting. Yeah, that definitely goes back to the idea that the artist is revealing something through the painting.
It's a vehicle. Yeah.
Well, and I think like it can be like, the reason it can be so effective is because there's like those things that you like can't really describe with words, and it's just much easier to understand through like an image.
Yeah, no, it's such a cliche to say that a picture tells 1,000 words, right? But sometimes, like that picture, I mean,
like what
you would have to read a book about Goya to understand the same thing that just this one snapshot represents. That he's like down in the dumps. He's viewing religion as something that's hurting people, and he has a hatred towards God. Like he thinks that God is unjust, like, because that picture was depicting God eating a baby, which is, obviously absurd and despicable.
So I'm trying to pull this up on Twitter. So you guys might need to keep talking, fill that empty space.
So what are we looking at? Or what are we looking for?
So what we're looking for is, I follow this guy on Twitter. Great follow. You guys should follow him if you're on Twitter. But he was making this point that, so going back to the art thing, you look back at any ancient society, like you look back at the Romans, you look back at the Greeks, the Italians, like all these ancient cities, or not all of them, but for the most part, a lot of them, they have sculptures, they have like crazy architecture. And it's like you go there and it's kind of the same thing with the painting, where you go there and you're just like, you're filled with like this awe and this like appreciation for life. And like during the Renaissance, where you had this burst of architecture, like you go to that Renaissance art, or I personally have never been there, but you look at that and you get a sense of like the reality that these guys are operating. It's like this flourishing of like appreciation for life and like inspiration and creativity. And we don't see that anymore. Like you go to our cities, our suburbs, our towns, locally, like nationally, like the architecture now is like purely functional. Like we talk about the modern house, where it's just like this box. It's just like looks like what is that? Like there's no beauty in that. It's just like purely functional. Or like these copy and paste houses and like the developments like over by Orono, like those. It's just the same one over and over again. It's like where is the beauty? Where is the expression anymore? Like I personally think that you suffer on practicality, and it's definitely going to cost more. But the benefit of living in an area where you look around, it's just like inspiration all over. Like that's gotta like pay dividends by just like being in that environment. So I want to pull up pictures to show you what I'm talking about. But
that's why I have such an appreciation for Yale, is because I went there recently, and they have all these new residential buildings. They were built in, I think, 2017, and they were built in the Gothic style, so they look like they were built in, I don't know, what would that be, like the 1700s? Yeah. And they're just so beautiful. Like, you walk in and you're filled with that same sense of awe that, like, I was in MIT a few days earlier, and you walk around and you just see these functional concrete buildings, like glass and concrete, and there's some sort of beauty to that, because once again, it reveals the industry and the innovation, but at the same time, you're losing out on that whole other dimension.
Yeah, and I think, well, certain people would be like more like logical, functional type minded, and they would genuinely see more beauty in like they just like efficiency, like pure just building buildings like dollar for dollar, like. But then a lot of people will also have a lot more enjoyment in variety and like just seeing more older style architecture. And I also wonder about whether or not like part of the reason we find like modern architecture less interesting is because it's what we're living in. Because like, do you think in hundreds of years, like, you never know, they may end up saying, oh, like 2000s architecture is so cool.
Yeah, they might look back and say, well, first of all, they probably won't be around that long because they're not built in the same way that they used to be, and they probably won't last as long. But yeah, once again, they might go back and say like, wow, those glass skyscrapers are so beautiful, and in a way they kind of are. They're beautiful. But yeah, when you're building a space, you have to think about what's the purpose of this space, and then how can that purpose flow into the building and make it beautiful. So like, I think the best example of this is a church.
Yeah.
Right. Like the most beautiful buildings in the world are churches and mosques.
Yeah.
I think most people would
churches, mosques, temples.
Yeah.
Pyramids,
so like, for example, like Notre Dame, or like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome or in the Vatican. So like, what are they thinking about when the architect is designing that building? He's thinking, how can I move the hearts of the congregation towards the heavenly, so that when he walks into this room, he's filled with a sense of the divine and he wants to worship. That's the whole point of a church building, is to like move somebody's soul upward to the divine. And so that's why there are all these massive pillars, and over the altar there's usually like the core of the church, which means heart. There's this big dome, right? Roman's really trying to find this one tweet.
Well, because it just proves the point so perfectly, because it has the before and the after, and you could just like see like. Yeah. Anyway.
Is it what kind of architecture are you trying to find?
It's just all sorts of stuff. Like they show like all sorts of buildings, but in any case, I agree with you on the. I think that's originally how it started. Is like you have, what's the famous church in Italy with the Michelangelo paintings?
The Sistine Chapel.
Yeah. Like you go there and it's like. You think these people have to know something that I don't. Like they have to be in touch with something. If they can produce something of beauty like this, like it's just so beautiful that they convey something that just like doesn't have words to it. It's like we have the answers. Look, like we don't even need to tell you. It's just there. Yeah. But
so this picture, for example, I pulled up. So this is like. The first picture is taken probably 1940 or 1950. And the second picture is from recently, like probably 2000s or earlier, maybe like 1980s. But basically there was a big shift in the church where after Vatican II, which was an ecumenical council in the 1950s and 60s, the church started to try to be more modern, basically, trying to like, they were like, oh, we're losing members, how can we be more with the times?
Yeah.
And so that transferred into like all regions of the church. And then they said, well, maybe our buildings should look more like the modern buildings.
Yeah.
So a lot of the beauty that used to be in these old churches was basically wiped away, and this is one example of that. So like all of these statues at the front, I think some of that's just paintings, but either way the paintings are beautiful too, and they reveal like the heavenly glory that a church is supposed to reveal. And now it's like this bare bones
minimalistic.
Yeah, minimalist design.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you're thinking about how you're designing that space, like we said, you're trying to reveal the divinity.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of a church. And which one brings you into heaven more? Like, which one makes you feel more like you're in heaven? Is it the one on the left or the right?
Yeah, it's obviously going to be the one on the left.
Yeah. So, it's just, that's what you have to think about when you're designing a building.
I think it's just a function that as a society, like we started as like artisans, like the shoemaker, each shoe was individual. It was like you put work into it, and it was like a piece of art basically, because it's like there was satisfaction in like producing a piece of art in a shoe, and it was like being a master of your craft was like something divine, right? Like I think now, like it started with the Industrial Revolution, where it transitioned from like you take time to build one product with like a bunch of different pieces. We switched to like now you just mass produce each piece by itself, and then you put it together at the end. It's all the same. It's all about scale. It's all about
money,
profits, profit margins. And I think that transitions also to like the architecture, like the real estate space, where it's just about like how can we optimize. It's just like a function of being in like a capitalistic society where you're optimizing for profit. But I think there's something that we lose psychological by not having that architecture.
Yeah, and that's something that I really appreciate about Gothic architecture in particular, is there's so much detail, like in every single aspect of like the embellishments on top of the tower, or the gargoyles, or whatever goes into Gothic architecture. Everything it's so obvious that it was crafted by hand, and so much detail and effort went into it. And there's just something that reveals through that like somebody cared about this, and that this is an important thing. You know?
I mean, you could argue that maybe part of the beauty is recognizing all the work that went into it. Like you look at the Sistine Chapel, and like you understand that there were artists on. I believe there were multiple artists in the Sistine Chapel, right? Or like Michelangelo, hired.
I think he had other painters.
Well, in any case,
either way,
there were other huge art projects where people dedicated decades of their life to this. Like it was a massive project where you just can't even fathom how committed they were to that goal. And there's something beautiful about that, about someone going in and just dedicating everything, sacrificing everything for this piece.
Yeah. You can tell how much the artist cared about it, and that transfers to like how if the artist cared this much about it, there has to be something important about this thing. Right?
Well, yeah, I think that like the care and like meticulousness, I think that transfers to things even outside of like, I guess architecture, art is like can be one and the same, but if you look at something like, obviously the pyramids are just insanely impressive, and part of that is just because you know the amount of work that was put into that by the Egyptians to make it, and like the fact that they didn't have crazy technology, and that it was made with bare hands pretty much, and I think that's part of what makes things like that so impressive.
Yeah. Like the pyramids aren't necessarily the most beautiful thing on the planet, but there's some sort of beauty to them, just because like how is this possibly created? It's
exactly
so incredible.
All right.
Should we transition?
Yeah, we can segue.
All right, let's segue. Oh, another piece of art. Watch this segue. Is films. All right, just kind of like paintings, kind of like poetry, kind of like architecture. You could also view films as an expression of.
I would agree.
Of the director's vision and their perspective on life. And certain genre of films I want to talk about today are mob films. Okay. Here's my question. You look at, I couldn't find the statistic on the percentage of all-time top-performing films that are mob films, but it's up there, right? You have the Godfather series, you have Scarface, you have Goodfellas, you have Casino, Sopranos TV series, like one of the top-performing TV series of all time, about a mob family. But my question is, why? Like, why are mob films so high performing? What is it about mob films that draw us in? Like, is it maybe the sort of thing where it's like, a lot of us feel like restricted by society. Like, we feel like maybe there's a part of us that wants to, like, is attracted to that dangerous, risky, like, contrarian lifestyle. Or maybe it's like the power of being a mob boss, yeah, like a drug kingpin. Like, there's something where we kind of feel like that's missing in our lives that kind of attracts us to that. Or maybe it's our violent tendencies, where a lot of times we live in a society that represses those violent tendencies, so that's why we're not even mob films, but also like violent action films. Like, we like the violence in that. I don't know, I just think it's something that you wouldn't expect given the emphasis we place on, like, resolving conflicts non-violently, like being polite to the person next to you. And then it's like, but we love mob films where like they beat up victims, or like shoot witnesses, or like torture witnesses, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, like, really got me thinking, because we were just talking about like the most beautiful things, and now we're talking about something that's dark and grim. So like, maybe it's because like, darkness attracts darkness, and beauty and lightness attracts beauty, and goodness. And in our society, like, we have kind of moved away from this idea that like that beauty is so important, and this kind of divine like awe of things. And so we kind of come into this dark, I don't necessarily want to say our whole society is just like darkness, but like we're more focused on function than beauty, more focused on pretty much everything. And so is that darkness, or this lack, I guess, of light, which that's what darkness is.
Darkness.
But this lack of beauty, right? This lack of light, is that what's drawing people to this kind of dark area of like angst and violence that is like the mob genre, right?
Here's another thing, like all the top performing like rap songs, rap is like one of the most popular genres right now. It's pretty much mandatory that you have some sort of like gangster lifestyle lyrics in there, like like doing drugs, like, you know, like Lil Peep, Juice WRLD, they were all famous for romanticizing like
The drug, like
hitting drugs 24/7, like just prescription bottles all over the car floor, stuff like that. Like, that's romanticized, glorified. Even back to the 90s, like Snoop Dogg talking about like, I don't know, just like popping dudes, running drugs, like stuff like that. It's like there's some part of it where it's like, yeah, you want the artist to express themselves in the stuff that they've been through, but then you also have people who have never been in the projects or grew up in that area, who feel pressured to use those lyrics in order to like succeed.
Yeah.
So it's like there's something where like the audience wants that. They want that kind of like grittiness that you're not supposed to say that. But like NWA, like they became famous for saying the stuff that is not okay to say during that time. Like they were like the rebellious, like like gangster, like that the young kids like, because it's like they weren't supposed to like listen to that sort of stuff. Like it's just that type of deal.
Yeah, that makes me think of like, I don't know, like the young, like up and coming rapper, like, I know like it was like a few years ago, but like Lil Tecca and like Kid Leroy, when they're on the come up, they're like 15, 16-year-old kids talking about all these things, like doing drugs and like having sex, and it's literally just things they've never done because that's just like what the industry expects of them. Or like, that's just like what sells at the end of the day. And I think that's interesting.
So why does that sell?
That's a good question. I think there's an inherent like human attraction to like, that's almost adrenaline or just breaking the law is something that humans, like movies, TV shows, a lot of stuff that's popular is like against the law, I would say.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know what the answer is to why, but it seems like there's, like, when humans are told that we can't do something, we just have this desire to do it. Like even little kids, right?
Yep.
You tell a child they can't play with a certain toy or do this one thing, and that's all they want to do, right? So we have this like, I don't know what it is, just this desire to do what we're told we can't, and in a way like that pushes us towards innovation because we're told, oh, you can't go to the moon, and then the U.S. like tries for years, and we finally do it. We go to the moon, right? So in a way, that's what pushes us forward, and maybe that's just what it is. Like we're told that we can't do something, and so we have to do it, and that's what has pushed us forward throughout our like the entirety of humanity, and so that's just become part of our DNA almost.
It's almost like
And
a
so
cliche. Like you always hear from like successful athletes or like entrepreneurs or celeb actors, like they told me I couldn't do it, so then I went and did it. Like it's like that fuel that drives them. Like a lot of times they cite that like one person. Like it's in a Jay-Z song, I forget what song it is, but he's basically talking about like the one thing that fueled him was his teacher telling him that he's gonna be a pothead or he's gonna be dead. And that was the thing that drove him to like every time he was like not motivated, he thought about that one teacher and how he wanted to prove her wrong. There's something about that that's become like a cultural, like you were talking about, like that's a cultural, like that's like part of the fabric of our society almost. Like don't listen to the haters, like let them fuel you. That I feel like that's comes up over and over again. I don't know what that is.
I feel like you could almost call that an evolutionary trait. The enjoyment of triumph, like a successful hunt or something, like that releases hormones in your brain that makes you happy. So it's like, that's the same thing as conquering a challenge or somebody tells you can't do something and you do it. I feel like that signals the same. It's the dopamine, like the chase of reward.
Yeah.
And that's something that kind of becomes diluted nowadays.
Yeah, but the one problem that we're having now is that we have these challenges and we're told that we can't do this thing. And sometimes, like, and anytime we're told that we can't do something, we have this desire to just do it. But a lot of times these days, since we have wise mentors, like our parents and society, they tell us that we can't do something and it's for a legitimate reason. Like, you can't do drugs because it's going to ruin your life. But then we still have that thing in us that's like, oh, now I really want to do that. So we have to be able to discern, like, what's actually going to push me forward and what's just going to hold me back because these people are wiser than me. That's why they're telling me not to do something.
Another part where this like manifests, I feel like, is in like football. Like football is like one of the most popular sports because of those big hits. Or like hockey, like people love when you just like smash a dude. Or like boxing, like they love like the haymaker from Mike Tyson that just crushes a dude's face. Or like the UFC is really big right now and it's growing. Same thing where it's like that. We want to like part of us just like needs that, like it's almost like an aggressive outlet. It's like we seek it out in sports too. Like we want to dominate. Like we want to win over other people. It seems like. So I don't know. I just think it's a weird quirk of human.
I think that's like
psychology.
a male, or like I don't necessarily know if it's only male, but like for example, like lacrosse was invented in like the Americas, right? And it's like Native Americans, they were pretty much like fighting each other, like full on, like anything goes.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's part of human nature to want to let out that aggression, I would say.
A lot of times we repress it too, and I think that's got to have ramifications.
Yeah.
In any case, this is a perfect segue, unless you guys have any other thoughts.
No, that's good. I like it.
We're talking about a lot about like repressed human nature and wanting to dominate. New Netflix Jeffrey Dahmer series. Have you guys watched it yet? Or heard anything about it? Apparently, it's really good, and it got me thinking about this one video that I saw. And this is crazy for a lot of reasons, but first and foremost, when you think about a serial killer, cannibal, who, Brock's calling you.
You just keep talking.
Who gets pleasure from dominating other people. You expect to see everyone else, every other personality except this guy. Like, this guy is like the most articulate. He seems intelligent. He seems like reserved, in control. He seems like someone who would be leading like a tech business, or like a software developer, like just a regular guy who, like, he's a little bit nerdy, you can tell that, but like he seems like he's got it in control when you listen to him talk. But the stuff that he talks about is so like contrasting with his demeanor that it's like, it like puts like chills up your back. Like, it's just like such a contrast. And it's just like, he goes into talking about how there's this personality in him, we're talking about like the repressed aggressive side, that it started out kind of like, he just noticed it. He's like, hey, there's like another person in here that's kind of like, I don't know what that is. It's aggressive, it's compulsive, it's making me think about these weird things that I don't want to act on. And it starts to grow, and then it just takes over. Where like he says that he slept over with this dude, and because he's gay, and he wakes up and the guy is dead, and he's like, what the hell happened? And there's like bruises on the dude's chest, and he doesn't remember doing it, and he beat the dude up while he was sleeping. He has no recollection. It's like that other personality, he says. So it's like this thing starts to dominate his life, and it leads him to do these things. So just like listen to what he says.
That I actually derives a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I had tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
While Jeffrey Dahmer may say things today that make it seem like he understands what went on in his mind, he does not. All he can do is tell you what happened, but he cannot stop whatever it is that drove him to kill in the first place.
Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
Jeffrey Dahmer says as time went on, his mind became more and more warped, and yet he was clever enough to continue to elude police and lure young men to his apartment. We should warn you, the details are very graphic.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17
The same
young
stuff
men.
they were talking about, like there's going against the grain, like dominating someone else, power, all those like repressed human desires. It seems like the average person is able to listen to society and be like, yeah, like I'm gonna keep that in control because I've been told not to let that out. Or you put up like defense mechanisms to like keep that in, keep it caged in. And it's like, for some reason or another, Jeffrey Dahmer's defense, the gate that he put around was like a little faulty. Like it was a little rickety. Like that compulsion, that aggression, all that stuff was able to leak out. And then the way that he talked about it is like it's like something that he couldn't reel in.
But I wonder if we, like you're talking about it as if we all have that same kind of, like, desire for dominance. And I don't think that's the case. Like there's this concupiscence in us that's like wanting power and dominance and sex and all these things. But at the same time, we don't have it in the same sociopathic way that some people do.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would agree.
But every one of us, I would argue, has those repressed feelings to some extent.
I mean, okay, yeah.
But not to like eat people. Like obviously that's a little extreme. But like absolutely to be aggressive, to seize power, to I don't know. There's some sort of like desire to be dominant that you see across the animal kingdom, and I wonder if that's just like a function of just like I don't know, animals in general.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so, because that's something that keeps you alive.
Mm-hmm.
The most dominant one is going to be the most, like, being the most respected. I feel like that has inherent value in nature. But then you get to a point where you have humans, and it's like, it's not beneficial.
But at the same time, like, even in monkeys, it's been shown, they've done studies, and it's usually not the most tyrannical monkey that is at the top. Like, sometimes it so happens that they're able to seize power, control, but there is usually, if this monkey is tyrannical and domineering, then usually there's some sort of coup, and there's another one that takes the throne in the hierarchy, and then that monkey is more compassionate and less selfish and tyrannical.
I would agree. I think this is definitely a bug. Like, you're not supposed to be that desiring of dominance and power. You're supposed to be able to balance it with intelligence, be able to use, like, social intelligence with it to balance it out. It's definitely, like, a feature and not, like, the whole thing. But, yeah, I've seen that, too, where, like, there was this Disney documentary about chimps, and basically, like you were saying, if there's, like, a guy who's, like, super aggressive, or a chimp, rather, who's the alpha male, the chimps will stage a coup and overthrow that chimp and replace him with like a more gentle, socially conscious, compassionate chimp. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sweet spot to the amount of aggressiveness or like power, because obviously you're too powerful. Like you said, there's going to be like a coup against you, or in this case, it's obviously just not healthy, not right. But then if you're like too submissive, you have to be like, especially like looking at the animal kingdom, you have to be willing to like take what's yours. Like if one of your like, I don't even know what the word would be, someone else in like your group of chimps, whatever, like takes your food, you let them take it, like take everything, walk all over you. Like you have to be willing to stand up for yourself. So I think that there's kind of like a necessary balance there.
I would argue that aggressiveness and ambition is a function of just like basic masculinity. Like that's part of what it means to be a man, is to be able to win the power game, the status game. There's something about that where we look at someone who's at the top and you're like, that's embodying masculinity. Like the ability to have a goal and go achieve it and go seek it out and go compete and dominate, and like in athletic pursuits, like the alpha male is like the QB who's like dominating. He's just out there like winning. And it's just like that's a real man right there. Or he's dominating like the social game. Like he's got a bunch of friends. He's winning. He's conquering. And I think there's something about the time that we're in today where that is less and less accepted, because we're more conscious that can go too far and you can dominate too much. And you know, like you have instances of like Harvey Weinstein where he's dominating way too much. Like he's not balancing it out with other traits of like compassion and all this other stuff.
Using his domination for evil purposes.
Right. So yeah, so you want to use masculinity as a tool for some larger, like, meaningful goal. But I think because we have those cases of Harvey Weinstein and other like dominating, aggressive cases where it's like, whoa, that's not cool. It's kind of swung to like men should be more submissive and gentle and accommodating, and it's hard to find that middle balance. But you want men to be aggressive and want to conquer in some cases.
Yeah, there's a famous quote. It's like, strong men lead to good times.
Yep.
Good times
Yeah.
lead to weak men. Weak men lead to hard times.
And hard times lead to strong men.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
would argue that we're in very good times, so we
Yeah.
have softer
Yeah,
men now.
I would
I
agree
think
with
that's
that.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, like, yeah, you kind of already said this, but there's definitely a part of society kind of drifting away from traditional masculinity, and yeah, there definitely is problems with that, but there's also like elements of that are needed, I would say.
I mean, you look at like our grandfathers going through like the world wars, and
Yeah.
just like, do we think that men today would function as well in those circumstances?
Yeah.
Like, that's like a whole nother level of man that you just don't see today. Like, instead you see more of like the nerdier types, or like more of the emotional types. You don't really see like the strong and silent type as much anymore. Like, undoubtedly, like there still are people like that. It's just less and less common because the times don't require it.
Yeah.
So then the question is, knowing that, should we work to add in adversity to men's lives in certain ways? Like, maybe that's what sports are. Like, that's why you want your son to play football, so he toughens up, he becomes more of a man. Maybe that's what it is. Like, do you want to kind of systematically add in areas where men can kind of exert their ambition and exert their like their aggressiveness in ways that help to build them up? And I think that we definitely should do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And a lot of well, for example, you look at Islam, and that's kind of a masculine religion, like, right? Like, the men are clearly, in terms of the hierarchy, like, men are superior to the women in that, like, religion's culture. And they do a lot of that where even in easy times, they have, they're supposed to fast, right? There's Ramadan where they fast for, what is it, a month? Mm-hmm. And then, like, there's all these different things where they're expected to pray, is it 5 times a day?
They're always, expected to pray. 5 times a
Yeah,
day.
so they're expected to drop everything, sacrifice their time, and kneel down and pray 5 times a day. They're expected to fast. So there's all these challenges and adversities that make them into stronger men. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that. Like, we can add challenges to our lives that will make us into stronger men. Like, that's the whole idea of asceticism, right? Like stoicism, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say though that, I wouldn't say that, would you agree that the purpose of them implementing that stuff isn't necessarily to make their lives more difficult? It's to give praise to their God.
Right. But because they do that,
It's
has
like
that
an
effect.
indirect cause, yeah.
Sure.
I think one thing we talked about in the past is how the average man's testosterone is decreasing. So that's kind of similar to how we were talking about like the easy times. And one thing I want to bring up is how so you're talking about like the average man's being weaker, less testosterone. So one thing that kind of brings to the table is like there's less competition. If you're like specifically like for women, like I think since there's less competition, that kind of brings like an emphasis on like, hey, if you can be like this more masculine person, you're gonna have more success in that realm. And I think that like can simulate harder times for those people that are like straying away from that traditional masculinity.
Wait, what do you mean for the women example?
So like, would you agree that like a lot of the times like the more masculine men that are like, you know, they're aspirational, not necessarily just strength, but like they're aspirational, like they have a good job, like that's like, those are like manly qualities that are going to attract women, right?
Yeah.
So then if those qualities are decreasing in other people and people are becoming lazy, they're going to have like less options, and that can be like a factor that makes their life harder, which inadvertently causes them to like go out and like reclaim those traits.
I see. Yeah. It's interesting to me too, because like women tend to be like, it's the stereotype where women are attracted to the asshole dude who doesn't care, who's a jerk, like he treats her terrible, but like he's dominant, he's like aggressive, he's not afraid to assert himself, and there's something attractive about that because that's a masculine trait. I don't know. It's just like, I think we need to cultivate it a little more.
Yeah, I think this isn't like a refined definition, but over the past few minutes I've just been thinking about this, like kind of the 3 pillars of masculinity in my mind are strength, protection, and humility. So like strength, I think that's kind of obvious. Protection, like we're meant to protect those that are weaker than us. And then humility. And I think that's the one that's really missing for us, because humility, a lot of times people kind of mix that up with weakness. Yeah. So in our society, people, they think, oh, men are too domineering, we need to make them weaker. Like, okay, I don't think that's the right solution.
You want to be a gentleman.
Right. You want to be more humble. And what humility is like, it's just thinking less about yourself. Right? It's not thinking that you're weak or you're bad. It's just thinking less about yourself and more about others. So like, how can you put your masculinity, your strength, and your protection at the service of others?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what is missing for us.
Something that I like about those 3 words is, well, first of all, strength. That obviously doesn't necessarily only have to mean physical strength. A lot of that does come down to like emotional strength, being like stable and like
hold your emotions in.
Yeah, and you can. Well, I wouldn't even necessarily say hold your emotions in.
But that's what people like come to expect from
Yeah, I would agree with that. But like, can you bounce back from like difficult situations? And then protection, like obviously not just physical protection, but like economic safety, like being able to like provide for your family. And then I agree with what you said about humility.
I think another part is, like, you want men to be masculine, but you also want women to be masculine too in certain cases, because that's how a lot of masculine traits lend themselves to being more successful. You also want women, you want men to be more feminine too. Like you want
A balance.
A balance, right? You want, like, the ideal man is like traits that we tend to say are feminine are like empathy, like cooperation, like these kind of like more like nurturing, like the motherly type, like that tends to be more feminine, which doesn't necessarily mean that all women are that way and they should be that way. It just means that women are more geared towards that, men are more geared towards this, but you got to incorporate both aspects to it.
What do you mean by we need women to be more masculine?
So I'm not saying this is true, but historically, womanhood has been associated with like submissiveness, of like kind of just you want to be the mother to the children, but you want the man to be the dominant one who decides and like goes out and hunts. Like evolutionary, that's how it's been. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the right way. That's how people have viewed it over centuries, whatever. But there are times when you should be more submissive. There are times when you should be more aggressive, right? And you want to have both tools to work with, is what I'm saying.
I think, going back to my 3 pillars, I would revise it and add one more. I would say the 4th one is sacrifice. Right? So we, as men, we should, and women too, but they sacrifice maybe in other ways than men do. But we should be able to, and that goes back to the humility too, but think less of ourselves and be sacrificial, like in our protection, be sacrificial. Like if we're working a job for the protection of our family financially, then we should be able to sacrifice some comfort or something in order to be better in our jobs and for our families. And sacrifice, I don't remember what other example I was thinking of, but what do you think about that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like sacrifice is important, but I also feel like you could fit that under like being mentally strong and like I guess or like also even humility, like being humble enough to not think of yourself, think of the benefits of others rather than just like what's gonna make you the happiest. But yeah, I do agree that's important.
All right, last couple of minutes, I want to bring up this example of masculinity. Like, when I think about real, like, great men, like, real men of history, like, I think about, like, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, these conquerors that literally, like, Alexander the Great, his dad dies, but before that, he started as, like, a 15-year-old or something, leading armies. His dad is like, I'm not going to give you the whole fleet, but I'm going to work you into it, and I'm going to start you slow. So he gives them, like, this troop of, like, thousands of men. And, like, Alexander starts off then, and he goes into, like, his 30s. He never lost a battle, ever. Like, he made mistakes, but he never once lost a battle over 15 years. And the stuff that he did, like, an example is, like, there's like this section of water in the Middle East that separates this island and shoreline. And there's like an empire on this island that was Alexander needed to like shut down. Like they were causing problems. And normal people would be like, you know what, it's cross water, like whatever, we can't get them. But this dude literally spent months building a land bridge over the water. And the empire was like, they saw it and they were laughing like, what is he doing? Like, what? Like building a land bridge, and then he started to get closer and closer, and they're like,
oh shoot,
oh shit, like he's actually coming. And they had like these long ass spears, like 20-foot long pikes. They're called sarissas, like cavalry. Like just imagine just progressively seeing them coming closer
over like a year.
Yeah, and they don't stop. It's like they spent like literally a year building that, and they ended up seizing the empire. It's just like, if that's not an example of like determination, ambition, persistence, like people telling you can't do it, laughing in your face, but like you go and like take their empire, burn their castle down. Like obviously he was not the greatest guy, but he was also influenced by his times. But this is a guy who undoubtedly did things that people would never think could be done. Yeah, just like every time I'm like thinking about like kind of like a role model of certain aspects of like being a man, like that's Alexander's pretty good role.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of it's not just about physical strength, because I imagine he didn't always have the biggest army or the like highest trained men, although I'm sure he trained his men very wisely. But it's all about, or not all about, but a lot of it was about, you know, his mental game and just like thinking.
Oh my gosh.
Like imagine that.
What do you even do against that?
Like you're not running horses through that. You're not doing anything. Like I guess you could rain like arrows on them, but
even so,
it's phalanx. That's what it is, not sarissas.
No, the phalanx is the name of the soldiers, I think.
Is it? Okay.
I think so. And the sarissa is the spear.
But in any case, dude, like, can you imagine just seeing that and just like the utter despair of just knowing that you're done for, dude?
Yeah.
And the other cool thing about Alexander is a lot of conquerors would sit back and call the shots from a tent. That's typically what, like I think George Washington did that. Robert E. Lee, the Confederate guy, I think he did that too. Like all these great generals, they already fought, so they're not going to go risk their lives in the battle. Dude, Alexander led the charge. Like he would literally be the one in the front, the very front, on his cavalry, like leading the charge. And when you have a leader like that, who's not just telling you what to do, he's out there doing it with you, and he understands you. You're sharing the battle with him. There's something about that, like his knowledge of like how to influence people. Like he took his people on this massive track around Eurasia to go conquer, And they were like 10 years in, and a lot of his guys are like, dude, I want to go home. Like, this has been like 10 years. Like, what are we doing? We're just conquering.
No, we keep going.
He was able to persuade his army to like just keep going, just keep fighting. Like that, we were talking about like gentle skills and like masculinity. He had the social intelligence, persuasion skills, and probably maybe not humility, but you know what I'm saying. He was able to combine those two. I just think that's pretty crazy.
But at least some sort of humility where he's like, you know what, I'm probably not going to win this battle if I just take some boats over and try to slash these guys down with swords. You know, he had the humility to think, no, I'm going to lose this unless I think about this in, you know, a smart way.
I actually don't think he had humility because he thought he was the god or the son of Zeus.
Okay.
I forgot about that. He probably didn't have that much humility.
No,
but in any case, pretty cool guy.
Yeah.
Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we're good to wrap it up there.
Alrighty, so it's 7.